Assalamu alaikum. For this presentation, I wanted to share with you some very interesting new data on alcohol. Why this topic? Well, because I think it has great relevance to the Quran, to our general theme of Islam and science, and because it often takes quite a while for data to filter from scientific meetings and journals to the public. And there is a quiet revolution going on in medicine right now regarding alcohol and its benefits. To start, I would like to just review a little bit of the Quran regarding alcohol because that will kick off our discussion. And then at the end, inshallah, I will come back to a little bit more detail about the Quranic verses for those who are interested. So alcohol was prohibited in three stages, three verses in the Quran. I will not go over the verses in detail, but I just want to start with the first verse chronologically. It appears in Surah Al-Baqarah, and it is said, and God knows best, that the Prophet was asked, peace be upon him, by the companions about wine and gambling. And the Quran answered the question saying, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يسألونك عن الخمر والميسر قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. They will ask you about intoxicants and games of chance. Say, in both there is great evil as well as some benefit for man, but the evil which they cause is greater than the benefit which they bring. And this is what I want to focus on. I was at a small meeting presenting this material, and I asked the audience, what are the benefits of alcohol? Because I think from the medical community, most of us have heard what the benefits of alcohol are. And so I'll ask you to think about that question. And probably most of you will come up with the notion of cardiovascular benefits. Alcohol in small amounts is good for the heart, right? It's good for the blood vessels. It helps your heart health. 1 to 2 drinks a day, has a lot of antioxidants and so forth. And that has been the mantra, I think, given to us by modern medicine. And so what is the great evil? Well, the great evil is that, yes, light drinking is good for you. Moderate drinking is probably neutral. The problem is heavy drinking. And heavy drinking imposes a tremendous cost on society from complications related to heavy alcohol use. And when averaged over society as a whole, it seems then that alcohol is harmful. I think that's the big picture that most of us have. But what I'm trying to bring across in this presentation is that the last few years of medical research have really repainted this picture, and so I wanted to share that with you. After this verse that kind of laid the general rule, there was another verse that prohibited coming to prayer while people are drunk. That's in Surah An-Nisa. And then finally in Surah Al-Ma'idah, which, as you know, is fairly late in the order of revelation, verse 590 basically says that alcohol and gambling and idolatrous practices and trying to divine the future, all of these are loathsome evil, and that we should stay away from it. And so that was the final stage of the clear-cut prohibition. And as I said, I won't spend a lot of time on the Quranic verses. I'll come back to the first verse, inshallah, at the end of the presentation. Now, this again is, I think, the traditional picture that excessive alcohol use has heavy costs that, when averaged over all of society, make it more harm than good. And that meshes with the Quranic verse that we looked at. So we know, for example, and this is not new data, I anticipate that you would know most of this data, that alcohol is very much a part of crime, and that crimes where alcohol is involved, murder 40%, sexual assault 37%, aggravated assault 27%, spousal abuse very heavy 67%, child abuse 40%, and of course alcohol related traffic deaths account for 28% of all traffic-related deaths. And when you add all of those costs to the economy, alcohol-related complications are $249 billion worth of revenue lost to the economy. So excessive alcohol use does impose a heavy cost. And again, we all know about, alcoholism and cirrhosis of the liver, and then the complications that causes, like ascites and so forth. So I think these pictures would not be a big surprise for us, and they are related again to alcohol abuse and heavy alcohol use. However, there is a shifting tide in medicine. So here, for example, is just a newsletter blurb that I received recently from Medscape Neurology. And all of these titles are kind of indicators of alcohol being reassessed. Why does alcohol affect the brain? Years of drinking tied to stroke risk. Alcohol and sleep, a vicious cycle. Alcohol abuse in late life, a sign of dementia. New predictor of problem drinking. So let us take a little bit of a more detailed look now at this shifting tide. The first is the cardiac effects. As I said, what we all have been taught is that small amounts of alcohol are not only safe, but they are beneficial for cardiac health. But again, in this Medscape news article, just from January of 2022, no amount of alcohol safe for the heart, according to the World Heart Federation. And so the widely held notion that consuming small to moderate amounts of alcohol is good for cardiovascular health is not supported by the data, the World Heart Federation says in a new policy brief. So in fact, the evidence is clear that any level of drinking can contribute to loss of a healthy life, the organization says. And over the past several decades, the prevalence of cardiovascular disease has nearly doubled, and alcohol has played a major role in the incidence of much of it, the World Heart Federation said in the brief. So the portrayal of alcohol as necessary for a vibrant social life has diverted attention from the harms of alcohol use, as have the frequent and widely publicized claims that moderate drinking, such as a glass of red wine a day, can offer protection against cardiovascular disease. And this is a quote from a member of the World Heart Federation, who was a co-author of the new policy brief. So you see that this is a major shift in our thinking and our understanding that has not come to the attention of the public. And again, from MD Edge Cardiology now, again, publication date March 30th, 2022, so very recent data. Even light drinking ups cardiovascular, CV here is cardiovascular risk, harm rises along with intake. And so the latest news out of the cardiology world, even very light alcohol intake is associated with an increased risk for cardiovascular disease compared with no drinking at all. And the risk increases exponentially as alcohol intake rises, even at moderate levels, a new study shows. So you see that this is diametrically opposite to what we have been taught and what most of the public believes. That even very light alcohol intake, it is not beneficial for the heart, it's not neutral for the heart, it increases the risk for cardiovascular disease compared with no drinking at all, and the risk increases exponentially with alcohol intake. So a risk that increases linearly would be something like you double the drinking, you double the risk. That's a linear increase. An exponential increase would be something like you double the drinking from 1 glass of wine a day to 2 glasses of wine a day, and you do something like quadruple the risk or make the risk 8 times, etc. That's the exponential type of increase. And so talking about these studies, our findings suggest that the observed benefit in individuals with light to moderate alcohol intake, which is consistently shown in epidemiological studies, is likely due to other positive lifestyle factors. And this is out of Mass General at Harvard. So basically this notion that light to moderate drinking is good for the heart turns out to be a statistical artifact. That's what the author here is saying. Our results also showed that while all levels of alcohol were linked to increased risk of cardiovascular disease, the association was not linear. Light alcohol intake is associated with rather modest risk increases, but there were exponential increases with increasing amounts of alcohol. And the risk gradient appeared to increase quite sharply, even between 1 to 2 drinks per day. So when you go from 1 drink a day to 2 drinks a day, which a lot of people drink significantly more than that, Dr. Aragam suggested that what might be regarded as safe levels of drinking may trend downward in the future, that even 1 drink a day is really no longer considered safe. And these claims that alcohol is good for the heart in light to moderate amounts are at best misinformed and at worst an attempt by the alcohol industry to mislead the public about the danger of their product. Again, this same author is saying, the World Health Federation conclusions follow a recent report in The Lancet, which, as you know, is one of the leading medical journals in the world on the global burdens of disease, injury, risk factors, etc. It found that there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. So that is the new data in medicine. From a cardiovascular standpoint, which was the big selling point about the benefit of alcohol, it turns out that it is harmful to the heart, even in very small amounts, and that there is no safe level for alcohol consumption. And in 2019, nearly 2.4 million deaths were attributed to alcohol, accounting for 4.3% of all deaths globally and 12.6% of deaths in men 15 to 49 years of age. And even small amounts of alcohol have been shown to raise the risk for cardiovascular disease, including coronary artery disease, stroke, heart failure, hypertensive heart disease, cardiomyopathy, atrial fibrillation, and aneurysms, the World Heart Federation notes. And we're not talking here about what you're going to find in alcoholics. We're saying even small amounts of alcohol raise the risk for all of these cardiovascular diseases. And again, I won't go through all of this. I'll just leave it, for you to come back to and peruse. But another big issue, so we've talked about cardiovascular disease. Another big issue is cancer. And it is found now that alcohol is a major avoidable risk factor for cancer, digestive diseases, intentional and unintentional injuries, and several infectious diseases, the World Heart Federation says, and that alcohol use has significant economic and social costs, etc. And so the World Heart Federation policy brief is calling for, quote, urgent and decisive action to tackle the unprecedented rise in alcohol-related death and disability worldwide. And they're talking about restricting alcohol availability, enforcing drinking and driving countermeasures, better treatments for alcohol use disorders, enforcing bans on alcohol advertising, establishing a uniform legal drinking age, and mandating health warnings on alcohol products. The World Heart Federation is saying, why would you have warning on cigarettes, but not warnings on alcohol, for example? And so, again, another Medscape article from December 2021, Behind the Curve, Alcohol's Diminishing Cardioprotective Value. And perhaps the most resonant argument for the benefits of light to moderate alcohol consumption, usually defined as between 1 to 2 drinks a day, has been its proposed cardioprotective value. And again, this association turns out to be more a statistical artifact than truth. And so again, a total reversal in the previous thinking, and that the benefit of alcohol is either minimal or non-existent, and that alcohol does more harm than good to our society. And so this is from Dr. Christopher Labos, an epidemiologist and cardiologist at the Queen Elizabeth Health Complex in Montreal. And so you really see a significant change in the trend. And let me get back now to the issue I briefly began talking about, which is cancer. So we've basically debunked the notion that alcohol is good for the heart. But another big issue is that alcohol is a major carcinogen. And surveys indicate that less than half of Americans realize alcohol increases cancer risk. And an epidemiological analysis estimated that alcohol contributed to 4.8% of cancer cases and to 3.2% of cancer deaths in the US. And again, this summer, Lancet Oncology, again, the Lancet is one of the leading medical journals in the world, published the results of a high-profile population-based study on the global burden of cancer as a result of alcohol. And the main takeaway message, that 4% of new cancer cases worldwide in 2020 were attributable to alcohol. And so it's noteworthy, how much of a carcinogen alcohol is. And the risk of cancer increases even with low or moderate levels of drinking, said the study's lead author, and that drinking less means you'll have a lower risk of cancer than if you drink heavily. But again, there is no safe limit of alcohol consumption, quote unquote. And the study linked alcohol consumption with an increased risk of at least 7 different cancer types, including cancers of the oral cavity, the pharynx, the larynx, the esophagus, the colon, the rectum, the liver, and the breast. And again, all of the data I'm showing you from 2020, 2021, 2022. So this is the recent quiet revolution saying that what we used to think about alcohol really is not correct, and that we had grossly underestimated the harms. And yet more negative news for moderate alcohol drinkers. And again, moderate, by the definition of medicine, is 1 to 2 drinks a day. You probably think that moderate drinking is a lot more than that. But a big study out of South Korea, again, showed that continuous low-level exposure to alcohol is a very significant carcinogen, and that it may even be better to binge drink on occasion than to have continuous low levels. And the American Cancer Society, who updated their guidelines in 2020 after an 8-year interim between their previous update, offered this succinct piece of advice, quote, "It is best not to drink alcohol." So can't be any more clear than that. And so we've seen now from the world of cardiology and cardiovascular health, people saying there is no safe lower limit. And from the cancer world, people saying there is no safe lower limit, and both of them saying it is best not to drink alcohol. Now let's go to the brain, neurotoxic implications. And there has similarly been a reconsideration of the effects of moderate alcohol consumption on brain health. So a big study out of Great Britain, basically saying that alcohol may have no safe dosage when it comes to brain health. And that even moderate consumption, and again, moderate consumption is not what you may be thinking, 1 to 2 glasses of red wine a day would be moderate consumption. We're not talking somebody who, drinks half a bottle of vodka a day and that's moderate consumption. Moderate consumption is probably much lower than the picture you mentally have. And it was found that even low doses of alcohol, Dr. Labos talking about this idea that even low doses of alcohol are bad for the brain. And he's saying deep down, I think most people know that alcohol is not healthy, but it's part of our social culture. And so we find ways to justify our own behavior. He said that in a quote to Medscape. And he suggests that clinicians, doctors, should reframe alcohol in their patients' minds for what it really is, an indulgence we shouldn't have too much of very often. And that, it doesn't mean we can't enjoy small amounts occasionally, but we have to stop presenting that it is good for us, because it isn't. So it is harmful. And they're saying, well, maybe people can indulge in this harmful thing occasionally, but, doctors should stop presenting that it is beneficial or good for us in any way, even at low doses, because it isn't. And again, just one extra drink a day may change the brain. And so in line with past studies, researchers have found a negative association between alcohol consumption and gray and white matter volume. What does that mean? Gray matter in the brain and white matter in the brain. Alcohol shrinks the brain. It causes brain atrophy. And as a person's alcohol intake increased, their gray and white matter volume decreased, getting worse the more weekly drinks they had. And the researchers noticed that they could tell the difference between the brain images of people who never drank alcohol and those who drank just 1 or 2 drinks a day. Consuming just 1 alcoholic drink daily could be associated with changes in gray matter volume and white matter volume in the brain. And this was a paper written in Nature Communications. The journal Nature and the journal Science are probably the 2 leading scientific publications in the world. And going from 0 to 1 is bad. Going from 1 to 2, about a pint of beer a day, was linked to changes similar to 2 years of aging in the brain. So not only the cardiovascular world or the cancer world, but brain health, alcohol clearly shrinks the brain. And people are now starting to ask, how does it do that? That's a technical issue that we don't need to get into, but a variety of what they call pathophysiologic mechanisms have been purported and are beginning to be explored. One of them suggests that alcohol increases iron accumulation in the brain, and iron is neurotoxic. It is toxic to the brain, and we have a whole host of brain diseases that are related to excess iron deposition. But that's a totally separate issue, only for those who are particularly interested. So again, Medscape article from very, very recently, November 3rd, 2022, and I'm taping this presentation in early December 2022. Stroke risk rises with years of drinking in young adults. So young adults who are moderate to heavy drinkers are at increased risk of suffering a stroke. And that's a big surprise. We don't think of young people having strokes, but the rate of stroke among young adults has been increasing over the last few decades, and stroke in young adults causes death and serious disability. And this is a study out of South Korea. And if we could prevent stroke in young adults by reducing alcohol consumption, that could potentially have a substantial impact on the health of individuals and the overall burden of stroke on society. And this was published in the journal Neurology, which is the leading neurological journal in medicine. So this is really a pretty surprising result. For those of us in medicine, we don't think of alcohol as causing strokes in young people, but it turns out that it is definitely a risk factor for inducing stroke. And alcohol, the more you look, the more you find. Alcohol degrades sleep quality, for example. And again, you may be wondering, well, how does it do all these things? There are papers and mechanisms that I will leave to you to look up. One of the things it causes is thiamine deficiency, and then that has downstream implications, increasing oxidative stress. It causes neuroinflammation, dysregulation of neurotrophic factors. And when we talked about the benefits of fasting in another presentation on Islam and science, we talked a lot about neurotrophic factors that are basically factors in the body that help the health of your brain neurons. So they become dysregulated. Oxidative stress kills brain cells, including Purkinje cells and granule cells. These are cells in the cerebellum. And so, this is not just epidemiological research, it is also basic science research beginning to now discover the mechanisms by which alcohol is so harmful. And just to show you, I know that this is, a fairly specialized kind of image, but if you look here at a normal person, here's an image of the brain. Here's an image of the brain kind of taken sideways or sagittal with the nose here and the back of the head here. Inside the brain, there are these fluid-filled areas called the ventricles. And with moderate drinking, the ventricles grow because the brain matter around them shrinks. with heavy drinking, the brain volume shrinks and these fluid-filled sacs are much better. This structure here is known as the corpus callosum. It connects the right hemisphere and left hemisphere of the brain. Look at how thick it is with moderate drinking, thinner with heavy drinking, very thin. So you see that alcohol does cause very visible changes in the brain. And again, a lot of scientific papers on this. There's no question about this. One of the areas that are very affected by alcohol is the hindbrain or the cerebellum. And again, here you see, of course, the person's nose, their tongue. You know how this picture is oriented. The cerebellum is here. If you've looked at a lot of MRI scans like I have, right away you notice that this cerebellum is very small and there's a lot of fluid around it because it has shrunk. And when you lose the cerebellum, you get something called ataxia. And what ataxia is discoordination. And that's why when the police do sobriety tests, they have you try to walk in a straight line or touch your finger to your nose and that sort of thing, because these are functions of the cerebellum to be able to do those things smoothly and easily. And someone who is drunk and having alcohol affecting their Purkinje cells cannot do that. And when people drink for a long time and the alcohol causes cells to die, then they're permanently left in that uncoordinated state. And again, the article itself from Nature Communications that I was telling you about before, the associations between alcohol consumption and gray and white matter volumes in a large United Kingdom biobank. And that basically is the one that showed that, we all know that heavy alcohol consumption is associated with brain atrophy, but now we know that even light drinking is associated also with brain atrophy. And so their conclusion here is, here we show that the negative associations between alcohol intake and brain macrostructure and microstructure are already apparent in individuals consuming an average of only 1 to 2 drinks daily, or really 1 to 2 daily alcohol units. 1 drink is 2 units of alcohol. So even a drink a day shrinks brain volume. And this data is not known to most physicians even. Physicians know that heavy alcohol use, alcohol abuse, alcoholism shrinks the brain, but a lot of physicians are not aware that light alcohol use turns out to also have significant effects on the brain. And, these studies are done with very, very advanced cutting-edge techniques. I just wanted to show you, for interest's sake, something called diffusion tensor imaging. It is a technique in magnetic resonance imaging where each fold in the brain, known as a gyrus, that's 1 fold in the brain, you can look at the neurons and you can look at all of their very, very complex interconnections, like a very, very complex fiber optic network. And when these things shrink and become sparse, it's like a tree that gets pruned, and it can be quantified and measured. I just wanted to show you something behind this data. And alcohol, of course, in heavy use can have devastating rapid effects. They're not all these chronic long-term effects. What you're looking at here, and I know, again, this is a picture for specialists. It's an MRI image of various parts of the brain. These bright areas here are all abnormal. This is a condition called Wernicke's encephalopathy. It is a rapid onset neurotoxic effect of alcohol that can cause seizures, it can cause problems with eye movement, it can cause death, and so forth. And the more you look, the more you find. Smoking and drinking are now both tied to increased multiple sclerosis risk, or more severe multiple sclerosis symptoms than a person might ordinarily have. And so it is really sort of an across-the-board harmful situation. And again, drinking a risk factor for epilepsy, again from February 2022. And I would like to differentiate here for a moment. You may have heard of people who drink heavily trying to stop drinking and having seizures. Those are known as alcohol withdrawal seizures, and we see them quite commonly in medicine. What we're talking about here is something completely different. We're talking about the disease known as epilepsy, where people, it is not because they drink heavily and then stop drinking that they get seizures. They will have sort of lifelong seizures if untreated because of brain changes or brain abnormalities, and that alcohol is a risk factor or a purported risk factor as well for new onset epilepsy. And of course, more research is needed before definitive conclusions can be drawn. But all of these are sort of big surprises that are coming through medicine just this year. And so I thought that you would be interested in getting a look at this cutting edge data, because as Muslims who have a holy book that prohibits alcohol and tells us that its harms are significantly more than the benefits, we are sort of faced with a bit of a quandary that the medical world keeps touting the benefits of light to moderate drinking, and that it is only heavy drinking. And we sort of justify in our minds, well, the heavy drinking, even though it affects only a minority of people, but we don't know who of us might fall into that minority, who might become a problem drinker, and that the heavy cost that that minority imposes on the majority of society makes the harm better than the good. I think that's the picture that most Muslims have in their mind. Well, you can change that picture now. The light drinking is harmful. Moderate drinking is more harmful. Heavy drinking is extraordinarily harmful. And that is what the new medical data is saying. And so that brings us to the question, okay, what are the benefits then? Because the Quran says it has benefits and harms. I believe that there probably may be some minimal to mild health benefits, but there are scholars, for example, like Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi in his book on fatwas, when he analyzes this verse, he says that the benefits are economic benefits. People make money from the wine and alcohol business, and that's where the benefit is. The rest is harm. So he doesn't, consider health benefits. People may enjoy drinking, that may be a benefit, and so forth. So those may be the things that the Quran is talking about, but the health benefits are really now seeming to be extremely questionable, with good data saying that there are no safe levels of drinking. And I just, to end on, for those who are interested in the Arabic, they ask you about intoxicants and gambling. قل فيهما إثم كبير ومنافع للناس وإثمهما أكبر من نفعهما. They have an evil, a big evil, and some benefits, and their evil is much bigger than their benefits. Now, when the Quran talks about evil, in this case, it uses the word ithm. But the Quran uses a lot of different terms for sins and evils. You have as-sayyi'at, you have al-fawahish, you have baghi, you have ithm, and I won't go through an entire list. That's a topic for another lecture. Is what are the different nuances between all of these terms that the Quran uses? But what I want to point out for those who have a particular interest in Arabic, ithm has a very particular connotation. When you talk about, for example, a she-camel that the Arabs used to ride in the desert, and you say that that camel athima, that it has ithm, what you mean there, you don't mean that the camel is sinful. You mean that the camel is slow, and it is particularly slow and holding the entire caravan back. So ithm has the connotation of not only is the thing in itself bad, but that it holds you back from doing the good things you need to do. It holds you back from virtuous conduct. And as you know, sins in Islam are sins of commission. They're the wrong things that you do, and sins of omission, that you should have done something good, but you didn't do it. Like you should have prayed, but you were drinking and didn't pray. And the drinking held you back. Or you should be well behaved, but intoxication led you to bad behavior, etc. And so it is very interesting. The Arabic word that the Quran uses for alcohol is ithm. So again, That's just a particular interest that I have, is the Arabic nuances in the Quran. I know some of you share that, some of you don't, and that's perfectly okay. But I didn't want to leave this verse without pointing that out. But I hope, inshallah, on the whole, that you found this discussion interesting and stimulating. And thank you for listening, and God bless.